Hi everyone, my name is Nate Hopkins. I'm the creator of StimulusReflex, a library that lets you build reactive applications with Ruby on Rails. Recently, Chris McCord put up a video of how to build a Twitter clone in 15 minutes using the Phoenix framework and their reactive feature of live view. It's a pretty fantastic video. I encourage you to go check it out, but I wanted to show you how to do it with Ruby on Rails using StimulusReflex. Let's start by reviewing a web request as handled by Ruby on Rails and what infrastructure pieces are necessary to handle all of that communication. Most Rails applications will have Puma as the web server that will spawn a Rails process to handle the incoming web traffic. But it also will create an action cable process to handle WebSocket concerns. Those are two separate processes that need to communicate, and they do that through Redis, an open source NoSQL database, battle tested and extremely fast. A web browser will make a request to Rails. Rails responds with an HTML page. Part of that page will include some JavaScript requesting a WebSocket connection. Rails will then forward that to the action cable process, which then in turn establishes a persistent connection with the web browser. That connection, that WebSocket connection, is long-lived, and messages can be sent from the browser to your web application without going through the typical HTTP handshake and everything else. It's all happening over the WebSocket connection. Your Rails application can respond in kind and send messages at any time, even from background jobs, over this socket connection to the browsers, all the browsers that are connected. StimulusReflex lets you take advantage of this architecture without really having to think too much about it. So let's learn how to build reactive applications using StimulusReflex. Let's create our new Rails app. We'll use Postgres, and we'll also set up Webpack to use Stimulus. And we'll call this thing Chatter, since it's going to be a Twitter clone. We'll wait for the dependencies to install and resume when it's done. Okay, let's install some additional dependencies. We're going to need Redis, Sidekick, which is a gem I pretty much install on every new Rails app that I create. We'll pull in CableReady, and we'll pull in StimulusReflex. Oh, let's drop into our directory first. Try that again. Okay, let's add CableReady with yarn as well. And now let's install StimulusReflex into the app. All right, let's have a look at what that did for us. So in app, you'll notice we have a reflexes directory. It created an application reflex and an example reflex, which we will use a little bit later. And in the JavaScript directory under controllers, you can see that we imported StimulusReflex here, and we pulled in StimulusReflex initialize application here. One setup that we still probably should do, and this will ensure that we use only a single WebSocket connection, is to import our consumer. And I'll show you where this lives. We're going to pull in the consumer from channels consumer. So we're going to import consumer from channels consumer. And then when we register the application, we're going to pass in the consumer. That's essentially telling StimulusReflex, hey, I already have a WebSocket connection. You don't need to establish one for me. Just use this one. Let's also pop into the config directory, and under application config, just going to set this up to use Sidekick. All right. That should take care of most of the boilerplate setup, and now we can start thinking about our application. So let's start at the model layer. We're going to generate a model for our post. It'll include a username, a body, a likes counter, and a repost count. Oh, and let's just move this back to count as opposed to counter. There we go. Those are the fields that are going to generate on our model. But before we migrate, let's pop over here and tweak the migration. We'll just make this non-null, give it a default because we don't have any users in here. We're just going to set the default username to Hopsoft. We won't allow nulls on body, nor will we allow nulls on likes count, and we'll default that to 0. And we're going to do the same thing for the repost count. So we'll create that and migrate it, and we should have our data model. All right, one last thing I want to do there is drop into the model layer, look at our post, and we're going to add one validation rule here. We're going to validate on body. We'll say it requires one character for a post, and maybe we'll just default it at 280 max post size. Next, let's create a controller. For our posts. Then we'll pop in here and go to our routes file and add a couple of routes. We only need the index and a create. Let's go ahead and set up root as well to posts index. We don't really want to do a whole lot of yak shaving on style sheets, so we'll just bring in Tailwind from a CDN. We'll comment that and then just pull in the CDN link for Tailwind. There we go. Not really efficient, but good enough for a demo. Okay, now we need to go create some views. So let me just collapse this up so everyone has their bearings of where we are in the application structure. We'll go into views, posts, and I'm going to create index.html. There we go. Nothing too fancy. A little noisy with the Tailwind styles on it, but not terrible. So you can see we've got a form, so let's go ahead and stub that out. And I've also got a post, which we will stub out as well. There's our form. I'm going to make this, keep it pretty simple. We'll leave it as a local submit on this. It's a little bit noisy with some of these classes. Maybe if I bring that down, that's a little bit more readable. And then let's do the post as well. Okay. So pretty straightforward, simple. Let's give a look and see what this thing looks like. Let's pop over onto another tab, drop into Chatter. We're going to start the Rails server. And I've got bundle exec aliased as BE in case you didn't catch that. All right, and here's our previews of what we've got so far. I've got them side by side. This is an incognito window so that we can start to show some of this interesting reactive stimulus reflex work in a moment. But first we need to go in and update our controllers, or our controller. So let's collapse this up again, drop into our controllers, look at the post controller, and we've got two methods. We've got an index method, and we're going to fetch our posts. Well, let's do this. Put the newest ones at the top. And maybe we'll limit it as well so we don't get too many on the screen, making our demo too noisy. Since we're rendering the form, I'm going to go ahead and instantiate a post instance variable as well. And then let's go ahead and do our create. So post is going to equal a post create. And we're going to set up some post params here in just a minute. And then we'll just redirect back to the post path when we're done. So let's set up those params. There we go. I think we might be ready, and we don't even technically need this variable. So we'll get rid of it. Let's see if we can create a post. Refresh. There we go. All right, the next thing we're going to do is start using our WebSocket. But before we do that, what we really need to do, or what we should do, is secure that socket. So we'll drop into channels, connection, and we'll just add a little bit of security here. We'll do identified by a session ID, and then when we connect, we'll say session ID equals request session ID. That, at the very least, will restrict WebSocket communication to this session. We know who the user is based on the session. Now, what would be great is if we could broadcast the creation of a post to every connected user. And that's exactly what we're going to do. But first we need to go create a channel, a new custom channel. So let's do that. We'll create the channel and we'll call it the feed channel. Come in and take a look at our channels under JavaScript first. There it is. We don't really care about connected or disconnected, but we do care about this received data. We're going to do something kind of special here. We're going to say if the data is CableReady, then we're going to ask CableReady to perform some data operations, or its data operations on this. And you may be wondering where we get CableReady from. That comes from an import. So we'll just say import CableReady from CableReady. Oh. And there we go. Next, we'll go take a look at the channel on the server side. So we'll drop into the feed channel over here. And we're not going to do any cleanups. We'll get rid of that, and we will stream from feed. That's just a unique identifier that identifies how and who we are streaming this to. So let's have a look at what's needed now to broadcast this. If we close these things up and go back into our views, let's just take a look really quick at our form. Well, let's look at the feed here. You can see I've got an ID on the feed, and that renders a collection of posts. So I do have a unique ID on feed. That's going to be important. So then let's drop into our controller again. And after we create, let's do something a little bit different. The first thing I want to do is pull in CableReady. So I'm going to include CableReady. The CableReady broadcaster. That's going to give us some helper methods. So now we are going to set that up to a variable. And we will now call the CableReady helper. And we're going to broadcast to the feed. Insert adjacent HTML. We're going to give it a selector. That is that feed ID that we just looked at. We're going to set a position. After begin. And we're going to give it some HTML. So we're going to render to string a partial of posts post. The locals will be post post. And then the last thing that we need to do is actually do the broadcast. The cool thing about CableReady is we can stack up a lot of DOM mutations before we emit the broadcast, which will be just one payload that runs over the wire. Oh, and I just realized I think we set something up incorrectly in our channel. So let's give a look at that. Under our connection. It's request, not request session underscore ID, but request session ID. All right. One more minor correction we need to make is in the JavaScript feed channel, that should actually be a lowercase CableReady, where we check to see if the data is CableReady. And I think we're ready to test. We'll refresh over here on both sides. We'll do a post from the right pane. Oh, that works. Post from the left. Awesome. Now let's go implement our likes and our reposts. So what we're going to do is generate a reflex for posts. So before we implement our reflex, let's wire it up. What does that look like? Well, we've got a link right here. And after that class, I'm just going to put in a data attribute, and we're going to add a reflex. The reflex looks just like a stimulus wire up if you're using stimulus controllers. So we'll listen to the click event, and we are going to send that click to the posts reflex. And the method on there that we're going to define is a repost. We also need to pass some additional data into that. And so the way we accomplish that is by attaching data attributes. So let's put an ID here and put the post ID on here as well. And we're going to do something really similar right below. So we'll steal this line, bring it down here, get rid of that. And the only thing we'll change is like. Oh, and we need a comma. There we go. Now we need to define the reflexes, or the reflex methods. So we've got a repost and we've got a like. So let's define the repost first. We'll get our post. We're going to do a find here. And how do we access that ID that we stuck onto the element? Well, we have a reference here to element, and we can ask for its data set. And we can just pull an attribute off of the data set like this. Then we'll just increment, since this is just a count, the repost count. And it's actually going to be identical for the like, except this will be the likes count. Oh, and let's fix this to be plural on our posts reflex, because that's how we named it. And let's see, let's refresh. All right, we are incrementing, but you notice it's not updating over here. Now there's a reason for that, because what's happening is you're seeing StimulusReflex at work. We didn't have to write any JavaScript for this to repaint the page. You're dealing with a very reactive application. We click this, it invoked the reflex method. The reflex method knows what page has been rendered, and it re-renders that page and sends it back over the wire, and a DOM diff is applied, and only the elements that changed are updated on this side. There are mechanics in place in the library that allow you to reduce the wire size by specifying sections of the page that you want updated. But the default behavior is to re-render the whole page, send it over the wire, and then we let Morphdom, the client-side library, do the DOM diff and the intelligent fast rendering. The next step is to broadcast these changes to all connected users so everyone is updated in real time when a like occurs or when a repost occurs. So if we jump back over to our post partial, you'll see that it has a DOM ID, and we're using the DOM ID helper method to generate an ID for the post and reposts, or the repost and the likes. So we need to pull in a couple of things into our reflex to help us here. So first thing we're going to pull in is the CableReady broadcaster. And the next one is to work with that DOM ID. So we're going to pull in action view record identifier. So then what we need to do here is tell CableReady on that feed stream that we want to update some text content. We're going to give it a selector. And that selector is a string value, but it's going to be a DOM ID for the post, reposts. That's the same ID we used on the element. The text we're going to feed that is the post. Let's fix our interpolation here. There we go. And we'll broadcast that change. We're going to do the same thing for the likes. And the only difference is this will be likes and this will be likes count. So there we go. StimulusReflex will do the reactive repainting of the page that the current user is viewing, and all others will be notified by the CableReady broadcast. Let's see if it works. I'll do a quick refresh. And let's give this one a like. Oh, and it works. Let's add a new post. There it is. So there you have it, a fully reactive application built on Ruby on Rails with very little JavaScript, updating the user in real time, broadcasting changes to anyone else connected, and it leverages all of the Rails techniques that you're already doing, from server-side rendering to Russian doll caching to anything else that you've already gotten familiar with in the framework. I truly appreciate your time. Thanks for watching. Please check out StimulusReflex and CableReady and let me know what you think.